Good morning and welcome to the Curious George Story Hour at the Curious George Cottage. Today we're going to start with Curious George at the Aquarium. And I'm here with all my George friends. They've fallen over. This is George. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. Today, George and the man with the yellow hat were visiting the aquarium. "George," said the man, "please wait here while I buy the tickets." George tried to wait, but he was so excited. What was inside? He wanted to look over the walls, but they were too high. Just then he heard a splash and a whoosh. Water flew high into the air. People cheered. What could that be? George was curious. He hopped over the gate into the aquarium. How surprised he was. Swimming right in front of George were two beluga whales. The mother and baby beluga whale swam right past him. And not far away was a family of sea lions, diving and splashing. What fun. George noticed people walking toward a big door. Could there be more to see? He followed the crowd. Now where was he? It was darker inside and there were fish everywhere. George did not know where to look first. In one tank there were sharp-toothed piranhas. In another tank there were seahorses. And in another tank there was a large red octopus. George saw a group of children across the room. An aquarium staff member was pointing to different sea creatures. This is a starfish, this is a clam, and this is an urchin. Nearby, there was a long, low, colorful tank. It was perfect for touching. George was curious. As he reached his hand into the water, a large crab came scuttling out from under a rock and right toward his finger. Snap! Ouch! Poor George. He did not like this exhibit. Do not touch. George slipped out a door into the sunlight. But, oh, what was going on here? George saw a fat, funny-looking black and white fish flying under the water. As he watched, they flew up out of the water. What kind of fish does that, and where did they go? George wondered. George climbed up and into their exhibit. They were not fish at all, but penguins, of course. George hopped like a penguin, flapped his wings like a penguin, and waddled like a penguin. A crowd gathered and laughed, but when he slid on his belly like a penguin, the aquarium staff stopped by to check on the penguins. A monkey in the penguin exhibit? George opened a door to escape, but instead all the penguins ran out. Penguins, penguins everywhere. The staff was angry at George. How could they catch all the penguins? In all the excitement, nobody noticed the penguin chick falling into the water. No one but George. The baby penguin hadn't learned to swim yet. As only a monkey can, George scaled the rope hanging over the beluga tank and swung over the water, saving the chick. The director of the aquarium and the man with the yellow hat heard the commotion and came running. "That monkey helped the baby penguin," said a boy in the crowd. "No one else could have saved him," said a girl. The director thanked George for his help and made him an honorary staff member of the aquarium. George said goodbye to his new penguin friends. He could not wait to come back to the aquarium and visit them again. And our second story is from a big book of George stories. There are so many choices, but today I wanted to read Curious George Goes Camping because it's summer and it's a good time to go camping. I'll read some of these other ones another day. Look at that one. That one looks good. Curious George Goes Camping. This is Ceorge. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. This weekend, Ceorge and his friend, the man with the yellow hat, had special plans. They were going camping. At the campsite, the man with the yellow hat unpacked their gear while Ceorge looked at all the tents. He saw tents for big families and one just the right size for a puppy. There were even tents on wheels. "Would you like to help me put up our tent, Ceorge?" the man asked. Ceorge was happy to help. It would not be hard to set up a tent, he thought. But it wasn't easy. "Ceorge, why don't you fill our bucket with water at the pump?" his friend suggested. "We'll need it by our campfire later when we roast marshmallows." Marshmallows. Ceorge loved marshmallows. He couldn't wait to try them roasted. "Now don't wander off and get into trouble," the man warned. But Ceorge did not hear him. He was already gone. At the pump, Ceorge worked the handle up and down. Soon his bucket was full. On the way back down the trail, he saw a family packing up. Ceorge watched a girl pour her bucket of water on a campfire. The fire sizzled out. Ceorge thought that looked like fun. He poured his bucket of water on the next campfire. "Hey," yelled the camper, "we weren't finished with that yet." The camper began to chase Ceorge, but Ceorge didn't mean to cause trouble. Now he only wanted to hide. He ran into the forest as fast as he could, but the camper's footsteps followed close behind. Ceorge ran faster and faster. The footsteps came closer and closer until suddenly they were passing Ceorge. Why, it was not the camper chasing Ceorge now. It was a deer. What fun to run with a deer. Forgetting all about the camper and the marshmallows, Ceorge ran after the deer. But a little monkey cannot run as fast as a deer in the woods. Before long, Ceorge was lost and all alone. He felt tired and stopped to rest. At first, he was worried. He was very far from camp. But there were lots of other animals to keep him company. He saw a lizard sunning on a rock and a squirrel clattering in a tree. Then he saw the tail of a black and white kitty peeking out from under a bush. He was curious. Would the kitty like to play? Oh no! Ceorge gently pulled the kitty out. But it was not a kitty. It was a skunk, and it was scared. The skunk lifted its tail and sprayed. Whew! The spray smelled awful. The animals tried to get away. Ceorge wanted to get away too, but he could not. The smell was all over him. How would he ever get rid of this awful smell, he wondered. Too bad he could not take a bath in the woods. Then Ceorge had an idea. He could wash the smell off in the creek. Ceorge jumped into the cold water. He splashed and scrubbed, but he was still smelly, and now he was wet too. But what could he do? Ceorge thought and thought. If he climbed up a tree to dry off, would the smell blow away? No, even dry and high up in the tree, Ceorge did not smell better. Poor Ceorge. He wished he hadn't wandered so far from camp. He wished he were roasting marshmallows with his friend. Suddenly, Ceorge heard footsteps heading toward him. Someone was coming. It was the forest animals, but they ran right by him. They had seen something scary. And Ceorge saw it too. It was a fire. Ceorge had gotten into trouble for putting out the one fire, but this fire wasn't in the campground. This was an emergency. Quickly, Ceorge climbed down the tree and grabbed his bucket. He scooped it full of water in the creek. Then, being careful not to spill, he climbed back up and swung from branch to branch through the trees. When Ceorge got close enough to the fire, he reached down and poured the water on the flames. Out went the fire with a big hiss. Just then, Ceorge's friend rushed out of the forest with a ranger. "Ceorge," he called, "I was afraid you would be here." "It's a good thing you were here, Ceorge," the ranger said. "We saw smoke from the campground, but you put this fire out just in time." Ceorge was glad to help, and the man with the yellow hat was glad to see that Ceorge was safe. But he had a funny look on his face. "Ceorge," he asked, "what is that smell?" We know what it was. Back at the campsite, George's friend helped him get rid of the awful smell. After a strange bath in tomato juice, George smelled fine. Then the man with the yellow hat invited the ranger to cook dinner with them over their own small campfire. Fires can be nice if you're careful, said the ranger. George agreed, especially for roasting marshmallows. And today's last story is The Very Quiet Cricket. First, I'm going to read this part because it's fun too. There are 4,000 different kinds of crickets. Some live underground, others above. Some live in shrubs or trees, and some even live in water. Both male and female crickets can hear, but only the male can make a sound. By rubbing his wings together, he chirps. Some people say that it sounds like a song. Have you heard any crickets yet? One day, from a tiny egg, a little cricket was born. "Welcome," chirped a big cricket, rubbing his wings together. The little cricket wanted to answer, so he rubbed his wings together, but nothing happened, not a sound. "Good morning," whizzed a locust, spinning through the air. The little cricket wanted to answer, so he rubbed his wings together, but nothing happened, not a sound. "Hello," whispered a praying mantis, scraping his huge front legs together. The little cricket wanted to answer, so he rubbed his wings together, but nothing happened, not a sound. "Good day," crunched a worm, munching its way out of an apple. The little cricket wanted to answer, so he rubbed his wings together, but nothing happened, not a sound. "Hi," bubbled a spittlebug, slurping in a sea of froth. The little cricket wanted to answer, so he rubbed his wings together, but nothing happened, not a sound. "Good afternoon," screeched a cicada, clinging to a branch of a tree. The little cricket wanted to answer, so he rubbed his wings together, but nothing happened, not a sound. "How are you?" hummed a bumblebee, flying from flower to flower. The little cricket wanted to answer, so he rubbed his wings together, but nothing happened, not a sound. "Good evening," whirred a dragonfly, gliding above the water. The little cricket wanted to answer, so he rubbed his wings together, but nothing happened, not a sound. "Good night," buzzed the mosquitoes, dancing among the stars. The little cricket wanted to answer, so he rubbed his wings together, but nothing happened, not a sound. A Luna moth sailed quietly through the night, and the cricket enjoyed the stillness. As the Luna moth disappeared silently into the distance, the cricket saw another cricket. She, too, was a very quiet cricket. Then he rubbed his wings together one more time, and this time he chirped the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Thanks for joining us. Hope we get to see you again next week.